Okay, so I listened to The New Testament and Its World by Michael F. Bird and NT Wright. The audiobook, it's part two of a two-volume set, and chapter 15, which covered Hebrews and James. I really liked what he had to say for Hebrews, a lot of good perspective about how Hebrews really focuses on Jesus, the sacrificial lamb, that was foreshadowed in the Old Testament through the sacrifice system and is the fulfillment of that. So he does a great job covering that. And then, and of course, we don't know who wrote it, and they go into that a good bit. Then he goes into James as being a very practical, pragmatic book, and some really good insights in that. And then they go kind of downhill on dating and that kind of stuff. And then in chapter 16, next chapter, they get into 2 Peter. And it's one of those things where I really wish they were better at talking about perspective on inerrancy, because it's pretty clear they don't believe inerrancy, at least not the typical viewing of inerrancy, which is that God inspired his word, he preserved his word, and it is free from errors. Now, I know as scholars, you have to look at it both from a God-inspired perspective as well as a human author perspective. But once again, a lot of things that they say, I know it's in line with scholarship, especially skeptical scholars, people that don't believe the Bible is true, that are scrutinizing it, and they have to deal on it with that level and see where those assumptions lead. But when you're looking at 2 Peter, they are basically saying it's probably a fiction. It's probably made up. And they just kind of leave it at that. Now, I think it's interesting, it's towards the end of that chapter or the next one, where a really interesting takeaway is that it doesn't seem to hinder their faith at all. 2 Peter, made up, not supposed to be in the canon, no problem. Jesus still rose from the dead. You know, that is a helpful perspective, because a lot of people, if they were to listen to what they had to say, by just putting the doubt in their mind that God did not have a hand in the canonization and bringing these books together to be brought together as a collection, that God did not preserve this, because they're still treating it as authoritative. They're just saying it's a fictional authoritative. And I don't get that. They don't explore that aspect of it, because if it's not true, if it's fiction, what implications does it have? Are they just saying that God inspired this, but it's not true, but still beneficial? Are they saying that God didn't inspire it, but God included it because it's still beneficial? It's still authoritative. There's all these questions about inspiration and authority that come when you take a book away from its historical context and writing. And that's kind of part of the debate. That is why they're bringing this up, is to say there are other people out there that reject these things for these reasons, but they don't frame it that way. They don't help bring in the perspective of resolving this. They just say, you know what, it might not be true, but that's okay. And I have issue with that. I think that they should have framed it better. They should bring in the perspective of, okay, if you believe that God inspired the whole Bible, here are the implications when we say that maybe he didn't. Maybe there's books in the Bible that aren't true or are fiction or shouldn't be there in the first place. They don't cover that, and I find that very disappointing. Now, they do make they do imply some things, but I really think for something that this significant, something that historically, in the last couple hundred years of history, where the Enlightenment period and German scholarship put a huge shadow of doubt on the Bible, given where we are in skepticism and how trying to show the Bible isn't true can shatter some people's faiths, they should take this with more sobriety and cautiousness. Now, I understand for a New Testament survey class that this is typical stuff to cover, because people that go through a New Testament survey class are typically training to go into ministry, and they need to be aware that these issues exist when you're talking about secular scholarship. Because the last thing you want is a minister or even a Christian to be misinformed and overstate their case, to say, oh, all scholars think. And it's like, no, not all scholars think. All biblical scholars think. No. Once again, no. All Christians, not all Christian scholars think this. So, yeah, on one hand, people need to know this that are in a position for this kind of stuff. At the other hand, your average layman, especially your conservative Christian, excuse me, I'm fighting allergies. Your conservative Christian that was trained on infallibility and inerrancy of Scripture, that's God breathed, and if there's an error in it, there's that has a shattering effect to the trustworthiness of the Bible. For this to be a popular level product, which is what they were selling it as. I mean, this audio set was pretty cheap. I get on sale at Christmas. I don't know what the book covers. Haven't gotten into that yet. But this is like the third or fourth time in this video series that I've raised concern on this. And it's not because it hurts my faith, because I believe that even though there isn't a super strong case, I mean, there's a strong case. There's a good case that the Bible is what it says it is. It's written by eyewitnesses or people that knew the apostles and the lifespan of eyewitnesses, that kind of stuff. At the same time, when you start putting doubt on that, when they even suggest that something was written in like the 2nd century, I just really think that they should put some better perspective on it that help people that would struggle with that to understand it better. Okay, so that's it for today.